Hi everyone, Small here. We are diving back into Arknights operator reviews, and today we are picking up right where we left off, with you, the limited 6-star operator dropping for the Chinese New Year event. And yep, this is the same banner where you can also snag Blaze Alter, who, spoiler alert, pairs really well with you. If you are on global, you can expect him to hit around July or August, so mark your calendars, he's not one you'll want to miss. Yu is the latest Sui sibling to join the roster, and is basically the backbone of any burn-focused squad, kind of like how Virtuosa holds down the fort for Necrosis teams. Just picture Virtuosa, but on the ground. That alone makes him a top-tier pool in my book. But Yu doesn't just bring the hit with burn damage, his kit is stacked. We are talking high DPS, built-in self-heal, enemy teleportation, and even permanent taunt. Hypergriff really pulled out all the stops for this guy. Alright, enough hype, let's step into the kitchen and see what our boy has been cooking. Yu is part of the Primal Protector archetype, a subclass of defenders that specializes in dishing out elemental injury. And just to clear things up, elemental injury is the fancy New English term for the type of damage that depletes and pops those burst gauges tied to elemental damage. Now, with a name like Primal Protector, you'd think Yu's job is to soak up elemental damage like a sponge, but nope, he's actually here to deal elemental damage, and his specialty is burn. That said, his kit does sneak in a bit of elemental recovery too, but we'll get to that later. Stat-wise, Yu has a similar profile to Shu. He's got a slightly lower HP and defense compared to your classic tanks like Oshiguma, but he makes up for it with a baked-in 10% magic resistance. What sets him apart from Shu though is his attack stat, which is massive for a defender. In exchange, he is pretty pricey to field, a whopping 26 DP without any potentials. Yu's huge attack stat isn't just for show, it's the heart of his entire playstyle. Despite being labeled a defender, he's clearly built to go on the offensive. His damage output is nothing to scoff at, and more importantly, his attack stat is tied directly to how he applies elemental injury. Just like Virtuosa, Yu dishes out elemental injury based on a percentage of his attack, not of his arts or physical damage. That's a big deal because it means his burst build-up completely ignores enemy defense and res, so even against high-tier enemies, he's burning through their burst gauges like it's nothing. This is exactly why he's a cornerstone of any burn comp. Alright, let's break down the difference between burn and necrosis damage. When you fully deplete an enemy's burn gauge, you trigger a burn burst. This hits instantly for a flat 7000 elemental damage. Boom! Right off the bat. On top of that, it slaps the enemy with a -20 res debuff for 10 seconds. Pretty good, right? Now compare that to a necrosis burst. It lasts longer, 15 seconds instead of 10, and during that time the enemy takes 800 elemental damage per second and gets their attack stat lowered. So while necrosis deals more total elemental damage overall, it trickles in over time, instead of hitting all at once like burn does. Now, don't underestimate how long a burst lasts, this really matters. Operators that rely on elemental damage, like primal casters or operators with delta modules, like Viviana, usually only get to deal that kind of damage during a burst. That means burn operators are working with a tighter window, just 10 seconds, compared to necrosis operators, who have a full 15 seconds to unload their skills. And here's a little twist with burn bursts, that -20 res debuff, it does nothing for elemental damage, since elemental damage ignores res anyway. But that actually opens up some really interesting team building opportunities. Thanks to this res debuff, burn damage isn't just for primal casters, it pairs super well with arts focused operators who do care about enemy res. So even if they can't deal elemental damage during a burst, they can still take full advantage of the debuff and melt enemies with regular arts damage. Now, since this topic tends to confuse a lot of people, let's clear up how burn and necrosis injuries interact. Yes, an enemy can have both gauges depleting at the same time, but only the more depleted one will show on screen. Whichever gauge hits 0 first will trigger its burst, and then, poof, both gauges reset back to full. You only get one burst per round. Before we jump into Yu's talents, here's a fun little synergy tip. Now that Yu is out, he completes the Sui Defender trio. That means you can finally activate all of Shu's second talent bonuses just by bringing Sui operators into your squad. And honestly, that might be the whole reason Hyperglyph made Yu a defender in the first place, despite plenty of classes still missing from the Sui family. Alright, let's break down Yu's talents, starting with his first one, which is really the backbone of his whole offensive identity as a defender. With this talent, any enemy blocked by Yu takes steady arts damage and burn injury every second. It's kinda like Virtuosa's passive tick damage to anything in a range, but in Yu's case, it only works on enemies it's physically blocking. Still, it gets the job done. As we have seen, Yu's burn injury isn't based on his damage, it scales off a percentage of his attack stat. That means it completely ignores defense and res, so even beefy high-res enemies can get their burst gauge popped without breaking a sweat. This is a big part of why Yu is such a linchpin for burn comps, just like Virtuosa is at the core of Necrosis teams. Thanks to this talent, Yu dishes out both arts and elemental damage at the same time, making him one of the most offensively inclined defenders in the game. He can shred through waves of trash mobs like it's nothing. And the best part, this passive damage still works even if Yu is frozen. He can literally be doing nothing and still melting enemies. Plus, this talent synergizes perfectly with the burn burst mechanic. When a burn burst goes off, enemies lose 20 res for 10 seconds, which means the arts damage from this talent hits even harder. Now, Yu's first talent isn't just about dishing out damage, it also gives him a hefty chunk of durability thanks to a 25% Sanctuary buff. Sanctuary reduces both physical and arts damage, in this case by 25%, which is pretty huge. Just like the damage part of the talent, it only kicks in when Yu is actually blocking enemies. You'll know it's active when you see those rings glowing under his feet. One important detail, Sanctuary buffs don't stack, only the strongest one applies. So, if you've got Shu's style buff active, giving 15% Sanctuary when she's running her Hex module, Yu's own 25% will take priority while he's blocking. Now, let's be real, 25% damage reduction is no joke. The stronger the hit, the more value you get out of it. And this goes a long way in making up for Yu's slightly lower HP and defense compared to full-on Protector defenders. Want proof of how effective Sanctuary can be? Comparing to Jessica Alter. Stat-wise, they're pretty similar. Jessica has a bit more defense, Yu has more magic resistance, but Jessica doesn't have a Sanctuary, and that makes all the difference. Against something like the Steam Knight, Yu shrugs off both physical and arts damage hits, while Jessica just can't keep up, and eventually gets flattened. And it doesn't stop there. Throw him some stat buffs from Yu's skills and the guy can even tank Patriot. That's no small feat, even for top tier defenders. Oh, and here is a little bonus. If you manage to get Yu to potential 3, the 25% Sanctuary jumps up to a whopping 30%. So yeah, dupes aren't wasted on him. That said, there is one catch. This buff only works while Yu is blocking. If he's getting hit by ranged enemies from a distance and isn't blocking anyone, that Sanctuary effect is off the table. So in certain stages it won't be as tanky as your classic wall-style defenders. Yu's second talent brings some much needed self-sustain into the mix, and honestly, it's a great complement to his more aggressive playstyle. Here's how it works. As long as you've got at least 4 operators on the field, including Yu himself, he passively recovers both HP and elemental injury every second. The healing scales with his max HP, so any effects that boost that, like certain skills or Aya Alter's second talent, will bump up the regen too. Now, the 4 operators requirement is pretty manageable in most cases. You'll only really feel the restriction in the early flows of integrated strategies. Just keep in mind that summons don't count, so no, Link's entire Dragon Zoo won't help you here. Pair this talent with Yu's Sanctuary buff and you've got a defender who can hold the line against waves of trash mobs without a medic babysitting him. He can shrug off cheap damage and just keep going. Even better, that elemental regen lets him comfortably ignore environmental damage, like the Star from Nethersea branded tiles. It also softens the blow from minor elemental injury dealt by enemies, which is becoming more and more common. You've got corrosion damage popping up in Thor's Altar's event, burn damage in Yu's own event, and more burn again in Necras event. This passive healing definitely helps him stay standing. That said, don't get it twisted, Yu isn't Shu. This regen is decent, but it's not enough to carry him through serious pressure without backup. Toss him into a stage with actual threats and he's gonna need a medic. The difference between him and Shu in these situations is night and day. Just to clarify, by default this talent only benefits Yu himself, but when you pop his skill 3, the healing and elemental injury regen applies to your whole team. And since skill 3 also buffs his max HP, it indirectly scales up the healing even more. Quick heads up though, each operator heals based on their own max HP, not Yu's. So beefy units like Hoshiguma will get a nice chunk of health back, while squishier ones like casters not so much. You can really see the difference in regen if you compare Hoshiguma and Logos side by side. Also, like before, this only works on operators, not summons. But here's the cool part, it does work on unhealable units like Executor Altar and Penance. Overall, when skill 3 is up, you and the whole squad can handle moderate elemental injury without breaking a sweat, and the HP regen is a nice cherry on top. It's nothing crazy or game breaking, but hey, free healing is always appreciated. Overall, this is a rock solid talent. Yu's got a pretty hefty HP pool, as expected from a defender, so regen that scales off max HP is a sweet deal. Plus, the 4 operator condition is super easy to meet in most cases. Sure, you'll still want a proper medic in tougher stages, but this extra bit of self-sustain really lightens the load on your healing line. Alright, let's dive into Yu's skills, starting with skill 1. The first thing you'll notice is that Yu gets permanent taunt. Yeah, permanent. That means enemies are more likely to target him all the time, not just during a skill. And honestly, that's kinda wild. Up until now, no defender in Arknights had a built-in, always-on taunt. The best we got was temporary taunt during a skill, like Penance skill 3 or Bubble skill 2. Meanwhile, the only 6 stars with permanent taunt were actually Muenar, a guard, and Lee, a specialist. Lee's taunt is technically tied to his skill 3, but since that skill lasts forever, it might as well be permanent. So yeah, Yu is the first defender to rock permanent taunt, and that alone is already a big deal, but it gets even better. When skill 1 is active, Yu not only bulks up with more max HP and defense, but also punishes anyone who hits him with a big chunk of burn injury, and I mean big. Against regular enemies, it usually takes just 3 hits to trigger a burn burst. That's nuts! This skill shines especially against long-range snipers, like the ones in Near Altar's event. Even if they're outside the light and basically invisible, it doesn't matter. They hit you, they burn, they die. Easy. to really drive the point home, compare Yu's burn damage to the reflect damage from Hoshiguma and Penance. Yeah, Yu absolutely melts enemies in comparison. Another really handy use for skill 1 is on stages with artillery type enemies, you know, the ones that fire mortars from across the map. There's a particularly brutal stage in IS-5 with those guys, and Yu's taunt makes a huge difference. Because it draws all the aggro, you can safely deploy your casters and medics in any order, without worrying they'll get deleted by the mortar fire. Now, one thing that might rub some people the wrong way is that this is a defensive recovery skill. So instead of passively charging over time, Yu only gains SP when he's attacked. That sounds a bit annoying, and to be fair, it can be, especially in slow-paced or low-pressure stages. But since Yu naturally pulls aggro, it usually works out fine in practice. There's also a weird bit of trivia here. When Yu first dropped on the Chinese server, this skill could actually trigger burn on Hack when he shot Yu with his skill. Yeah, Yu was burning Hack with reflected damage. Whether that was a bug or not, it's been patched out. That interaction no longer happens. All in all, skill 1 isn't bad, but you probably don't need to invest in it. Offensively, skills 2 and 3 blow it out of the water and come with way more utility. The taunt is the main selling point here, and the good news is you get it right at level 1. So unless you've got a very specific setup in mind, there's no real reason to specialize this one. Yu's skill 2 is way more cracked than it might seem at first glance. Let's break it down. The skill starts by dealing arts damage to all ground enemies in a diamond-shaped area around Yu, and then it teleports all of them right on top of him. After that, Yu temporarily increases his block count to 5, letting him tank all the enemies he just pulled. But that's just the start. Once the skill activates, Yu gets a huge max HP boost, which also scales up the HP regen from his second talent. This is crucial, because he'll now be taking hits from a lot of enemies at once. Thankfully, his Sanctuary passive from talent 1 kicks in while blocking, granting him even more durability. Now, here's the fun part. Yu gets an additive attack buff of nearly 300%. That's massive. You don't see numbers like these often, even on high-tier DPS units. And for Yu, this is a perfect fit, since his burn injury scales purely off attack, not damage dealt. So the more attack he has, the faster he triggers burn bursts. In fact, with this skill active, he can pop a non-boss enemy in just a few seconds, and with a 20-second duration, he can trigger up to 2 bursts per enemy in one go. And to top it all off, Yu's regular attacks switch to arts damage during the skill. Combine that with the minus 20 res debuff from burn bursts and you've got a snowballing feedback loop of pain. Everything in Yu's kit comes together here. He pulls enemies in, locks them down, sets them on fire, then nukes them with arts damage that just keeps hitting harder and harder. It's clean, brutal and ridiculously satisfying. Just drop him into a high-res stage and you'll see exactly how wild this skill can get. Yu's skill 2 also pairs really well with other operators. For instance, comboing it with Reed Alter skill 2 and her healing lets you do something crazy. Tank and kill Patriot. That's no joke. Another standout combo is with Blaze Alter skill 3. Don't underestimate this pairing. Yu's skill 2 is not a step down from his skill 3. This isn't just a filler skill. In fact, this pair can rival the infamous Virtuosa plus Nymph Necrosis wombo combo, which is kinda nuts. So yeah, damage-wise, skill 2 is legit, but what really sets it apart is the teleport mechanic. Here's how it works. Every enemy hit by the skill's diamond-shaped attack range gets instantly teleported to Yu's position, but the exact place where they land, that's random. So every time you use the skill, enemies might scatter slightly differently around him. And this randomness isn't just cosmetic either. Depending on where they land, some enemies can get shoved into pits. You might need several tries to dunk a boss into the abyss, but the potential is there. Now here's what makes teleport special. It's not a pole. That means enemy weight doesn't matter. You can teleport even the heaviest of bosses right onto Yu's face. There are a few conditions though. Only enemies that have a valid path to Yu will get teleported. If they can't path to him, they'll just take the arts damage and stay put. So enemies in separate lanes or ones that need to use stairs won't move. Roadblocks can also interrupt the pathing. Now let's clear up one odd case. Here, Yu does teleport enemies that technically need stairs to reach him. You can even check the enemy pathing on this website to see it. So, isn't this behavior against the rule? Well, not quite. Turns out, the red boxes on the map aren't treated the same way as roadblocks. They don't break pathfinding. So, in this case, the enemy does have a valid direct path to you, it just happens to run through one of those red boxes. Back on topic, you can't teleport everything. Static enemies like the SV9 boss or Theresa? Nope. Enemies mid-phase change? Also nope. That said, this teleport still opens the door to some absolutely hilarious cheese. Depending on map layout and pathing, you can bully bosses by yonking them backwards over and over, forcing them to endlessly walk the map in circles. And of course, no bullying montage is complete without Patriot. Poor guy can never get some rest. The possibilities with this teleport are only limited by your creativity. If we are comparing, I'd call this teleport a side grade to Shoes. Shoes can move more types of enemies and has some unique quirks, but Use is way easier to use. Just push a button. No need to prep with sowing seeds on tiles. And yes, you can teleport enemies through walls, which opens up all kinds of new strategies and routing tricks. One more thing that makes this skill really comfy to use, how fast it cycles. Skill 2 only costs 26 SP and lasts a full 20 seconds. That means it's almost always ready when you need it, and you get nearly half a minute of massive buffs, arts damage and 5 block crowd control. You can even use it for heli drop plays, since it only takes 6 seconds to charge on force deployment. Now, if we are being fair, the one big weakness of this skill is that it relies on you blocking enemies. That means it's taking a ton of hit, especially when teleporting bosses or multiple elites to his face. And of course, unblockable enemies completely ignore this setup, making you helpless against them, something Virtuosa, for example, doesn't have to worry about. But aside from that, skill 2 is an absolute monster. Huge damage, crowd control via teleport and a fat block count, all in one package. If you are using Yu, this is a skill you definitely want to master. And just for the record, when Yu showed up in CCB3 max risk clears on the Chinese server, the skill they all picked wasn't skill 3, it was this one. We'll talk more about that in the conclusion. And now we have finally arrived at Yu's Flash's move, Skill 3. When you activate it, a massive firewall appears in front of you, stretching across the entire battlefield. From that point on, any allied operator dealing arts damage across the firewall from one side to the other will also apply burn injury based on a percentage of Yu's attack stat. So once again, it completely ignores enemy res. Now, keep in mind, to trigger a burn burst, your arts units need 7 hits on non-bosses and 13 on bosses. We'll come back to this later. During the skill, Yu also gains a solid chunk of max HP, attack and defense, and as we mentioned before, his self-sustain from talent 2 now extends to the whole team. Just remember, it still scales with each operator's own stats, not Yu's. let's clear up a few things about how this firewall works. First, only arts damage counts, so physical damage dealers like Exusiae, no burn injury for them. Second, this doesn't just apply to projectile operators. Any arts damage works. That means Golden Glow or even Chubai. Yes, melee operators count too. Lastly, no, your operators don't need to be behind you. The only requirement is simple. The operator must be on one side of the firewall and the enemy on the other. So even units in front of you can apply burn, as long as they're attacking across the firewall. Now, there's one important thing to keep in mind when it comes to summons. For the purpose of burn injury, it's the summoner's position that matters, not the summons. Take Ling for example. In this clip, her summon and the enemy are clearly on the same side of the firewall, so you'd expect no burn to happen. And yet, you see the orange burn gauge ticking down. That's because the damage source is Ling herself, and she's on the opposite side of the firewall, so burn applies. That said, there's one major caveat. Only damage that has a source can trigger burn injury. Some damage types, like those from alchemical units deployed by Thorn's Altar or Tin Man, are considered sourceless. That means they can never trigger burn, no matter what side of the firewall they're on. Now, let's talk about the one real downside of use skill 3, the cooldown. With great power comes, great cooldowns. You are looking at 55 SP to activate the skill, but the trade-off is solid. It lasts for 40 seconds, which is plenty of time to melt a boss or clear out a nasty wave push. And if you're heli dropping you, good news, it only takes around 10 seconds after deployment to get it up and running. So that brings us to the big question, which operators actually pair best with use skill 3? Remember, to trigger a burn burst, arts units need 7 hits on regular enemies and 14 on bosses. That's no small feat, especially for slow hitters like splash casters, with a 2.9 second attack interval. From that, we can outline the ideal use partner. You want someone who checks as many of these boxes as possible. Fast attack speed, multi-hit attacks, AoE damage, long range to easily reach across the firewall, elemental damage to capitalize on burn bursts, skill cycle that lines up with use. So, as you might know, U was released alongside Blaze Altar, a primal caster, an archetype that thrives in environments with elemental damage. And Blaze Altar, in particular, is built to shine when burn is in play. No surprise then that she checks out a lot of boxes on our ideal partner list. With her skill 3, Blaze Altar has a short attack interval, deals AoE damage, has solid range, and most importantly, she can dish out elemental damage to enemies in the burn burst state. Naturally, she makes a strong teammate for you. That said, she does have some limitations. She doesn't do multi-hit attacks, which makes sense given she already has AoE and her skill is ammo based, making it a little awkward to estimate its duration. More importantly, her 30-second cooldown doesn't sync up well with Yu's 55-second cooldown, which makes it tough to keep them aligned over multiple rotations. Now, if you compare Yu and Blaze Altar to Virtuosa and Nymph, the latter duo edges out slightly ahead in terms of raw power, but Yu and Blaze Altar are still a great combo. However, there's one operator who ticks nearly every box on our list, Lapland Altar. Lapland has a 1.3 second attack interval, making her one of the fastest casters outside of active skills. And with skill 3, she summons up to 4 drones, so when you count her and the drones, that's 5 hits per attack. Huge for building up burn bursts. Each drone also deals AoE damage every second, stacking burn injury even faster. Her range on skill 3, global. You literally can't do better than that. And best of all, the skill lasts 40 seconds and has a 54-second cooldown, which syncs perfectly with Yu's skill 3. Honestly, it feels like Yu and Lapland were made for each other. Now, there is one trade-off. Unlike Blaze Alter, Lapland doesn't deal elemental damage herself. But that's not as big a deal as it might sound. A single burn burst already does 7000 flat elemental damage, so just triggering it is powerful in itself. And on top of that, burn burst applies a 20 rest debuff to the enemy, addressing one of Lapland's biggest weaknesses, her lack of res ignore. So not only does Yu boost her damage potential, he also patches up her kit. It's really a match made in heaven. Now, things get even crazier when you run both Lapland Alter and Golden Glow alongside you. This combo, it's pure chaos, and honestly, the most brain-dead setup imaginable. You just toss your operators in a safe corner, ignore enemy positions entirely thanks to global range, and start the fireworks. At this point, you're basically skipping the game's mechanics altogether. Elemental damage ignores dodge, shrugs off most damage reduction, and just melts everything. It's peak smooth brain Arknights, right up there with Wishadel. Another solid partner for you is Logos. We already talked about how necrosis and burn damage interact in the archetype section, but Logos isn't just about stacking necrosis. Over on the Chinese server, he recently got access to a new Y module, which should drop globally a few months after Yu's release. This module frees him from needing to commit to necrosis, letting him slot comfortably into burn-focused teams as well. To compare the two builds, let's look at Logos in a necrosis team versus Logos with you in a burn team. Testing them, it's clear that while necrosis still edges out in performance, Logos remains completely viable in burn setups. Now, one final note about Yu's skill 3. There's a small passive tied to the firewall. It has a 20% chance to delete enemy projectiles that pass through it. I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of low probability gimmicks like this. It's inconsistent, hard to rely on, and barely noticeable. Sometimes a fire arrow vanishes, sometimes it doesn't. Cool when it happens, but not something you can really plan around. So that's it for skill 3, and honestly, it's incredible. This is the kind of skill that can turn basically any arts damage dealer into a certified burn specialist. This skill has the potential to redefine your entire roster, present and future, which is no small thing. And don't forget, it gives HP and elemental healing to your whole team. If you've got good synergy operators like Lapland Alter, Blaze Alter, or even some solid lower rarity options, then mastering skill 3 is a no-brainer. It'll make daily clears almost effortless. But if you don't have the right pieces yet, then skill 2 might be the better investment, since it's a monster even when Yu is going solo. Alright, time to bring this review to a close. We've gone over Yu's entire kit, and it's clear that Hypergrave didn't hold back. Yu delivers massive damage, thanks to both his high stats and burn injuries scaling off his attack. But he's not just a glass cannon, he's got solid defensive tools too, like health regeneration and sanctuary, which make him surprisingly sturdy. He's not a fully self-sustaining wall like Shu, but with a bit of support, he can tank serious pressure. Each of Yu's skills fills a unique role. Skill 1 gives you a permanent taunt, Skill 2 is a powerhouse with both burst damage and crowd control via teleport, and Skill 3 turns your entire team into a burn-based artillery squad. Now, speaking of teams, you've probably heard about the Yu, Lapland Alter and Golden Glow combo. It's become a go-to setup for integrated strategies on the Chinese server, and honestly, it's easy to see why. As we mentioned earlier with Yu skill 3, this setup is a complete no-brainer. Global range, high DPS, and zero need to engage with mechanics. It doesn't get much smoother. But here's the twist: when you actually look at stage clears on Bilibili, especially the tougher ones, skill 2 is the one most often used. Sites like Archetype, which track Bilibili clear comps, show that almost every team running you uses skill 2, not skill 3. It's even more obvious when you check max risk clears for CCB3. Again, it's all skill 2. Same thing in tough stages from episode 15, mostly skill 2. And perhaps most telling of all, during the recent Vector Breakthrough event, Chinese players consistently used U skill 2 to dominate the main boss, using teleport to reposition it into a more manageable spot for tanking and bursting down. Across the board, the high difficulty clears favor skill 2. So here's the takeaway I want you to remember: don't let the flashy visuals of skill 3 fool you. While it's incredibly fun and powerful in the right comp, for high difficulty content outside of IS, the big brain Chinese doctors clearly recognize skill 2 as Yu's real trump card. When it comes to pulling priority, Yu scores a solid 9.2 on the Wishadel scale, which basically means he's a must pull. Being a limited operator, getting him outside of his banner is going to be painful and expensive. And the worst part, he's not just strong now, he's future-proof. His skill 3 scales with strong and fast arts damage operators, so the more operators we get, the more valuable he becomes. Yu is to burn teams what Virtuosa is to Necrosis teams, and we all know what happened to the folks who skipped Virtuosa, only to watch Logos and Nymph drop shortly after. That regret hit hard. Don't be that guy. Even if Yu doesn't turn out to be as universally essential as Virtuosa, he's already carving out a solid place in the evolving meta. If not for his burn synergy, then definitely for his cracked skill 2 and teleport. And here's something worth thinking about. During the 6th anniversary, Hyperglyph revealed a new archetype, Primal Guards. They're basically the melee counterpart to Primal Casters, and we already know of a certain burn Primal Guard who's likely coming. If you skip you now, you could be missing the key piece to unlock that unit's full potential. And let's be real, Hyperglyph just introduced Nervous Impairment, so we are probably not getting a 6-star burn ritualist anytime soon. Now, we could go on about how locking key units like Yu and Virtuosa behind limited banners is kind of rough, and honestly, players raising concerns about this are absolutely justified. Alternatives simply don't hold up to these operators if you want to play around Burn or Necrosis. If you're a new or returning player, pulling a Nymph or a Blaze Altar down the line without Yu or Virtuosa, chances are you'll feel pretty disappointed. That topic deserves a video of its own, but for now, just know this: Hyperglyph has made their direction clear, and if you want to build around these mechanics, don't skip the linchpins. On the bright side, Yu's banner also features Blaze Altar, who pairs extremely well with him, making it a great pickup opportunity for newer players looking to build a strong core team right out the gate. Plus, Yu himself is no slouch at E1. His busted skill 2 and solid first talent give him plenty of value even before promotion. Alright, that's everything I've got on you. Hope you found this helpful, and as always, stay safe and I'll catch you in the next one.